Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're diving straight into some incredibly detailed historical accounts to explore the life and the real character of Prophet Muhammad. We're going straight to the source material here. And the goal? Well, it's not just to map out a timeline of his life, but to truly understand the massive moral footprint he left behind.
So let's kick things off with a pretty fascinating question. How exactly did one man leave such an unbelievably detailed biographical footprint? I mean, unlike a lot of other great historical figures whose personal habits are just kind of lost to time, the sources show us that his followers literally documented everything. We're talking about his travels, his daily eating habits, his exact words, and, get this, even down to his exact number of white hairs. But, to really understand the man behind all these details, we have to look at the full arc of his life.
To cover this sprawling history, we've broken it down into 6 distinct phases. 1. The blessed upbringing and beginnings. 2. The migration and Negus' justice. 3. The conquest of Mecca and his incredible tolerance. 4. The actual truth of his marital life. 5. His great morals and humility. And finally, 6. His asceticism and passing.
All right, let's jump right into Phase 1, the blessed upbringing and beginnings. Right off the bat, you'll see his youth was shaped by profound loss. The source material tells us he was actually orphaned before he was even born. He spent his very earliest years with a wet nurse named Halimah, and that's where miraculous events like the splitting of his chest were first reported. Then, by the tender age of 6, his mother passes away, leaving him in the care of his grandfather. But here's the thing, out of all this intense, heartbreaking hardship emerged a young man known for his absolute, unshakable honesty. And that reputation, that's exactly what eventually led him to become a highly trusted merchant. Just take this incredible account from Maysara, a servant who tagged along with him on a trade journey to the Levant. He reported seeing actual miraculous events, like a cloud constantly hovering to shade him from that brutal, intense desert sun. It was this flawless, impeccable honesty, combined with these really remarkable signs that actually convinced Khadijah, a noble, extremely wealthy widow from a leading family, to propose marriage to him. He was 25 at the time and she was 40. Moving right along to Phase 2, the migration and Negus' justice.
So, when the early Muslims fled severe persecution in Mecca, seeking refuge across the sea in Abyssinia, the Meccan leaders were not about to let that slide. They sent a delegation to run a full-on political smear campaign in front of the Christian king, Negus. Led by Amr ibn al-As, they tried their hardest to convince the king that these Muslims were just a bunch of dangerous runaway slaves. But then, a young Muslim named Ja'far ibn Abu Talib stepped up with this incredibly powerful defense, and he didn't attack back. Instead, he eloquently explained that they were basically living in total ignorance until they were taught to speak truthfully, to keep their promises, and to actually respect their neighbors.
Ja'far's strategy here was just brilliant. He totally avoided hostility and leaned heavily into highlighting their shared moral values. When the king pressed him on their views about Jesus, Ja'far recited verses from Surah Maryam, that's the chapter of Mary in the Quran. And the historical source specifically notes that this beautiful recitation literally moved King Negus and his bishops to tears. Recognizing the shared divine origin of their messages, the king didn't hesitate. He immediately granted the Muslims absolute protection in his kingdom. A real game changer.
Now let's fast forward a bit to Phase 3, the conquest of Mecca and tolerance.
Years later, the balance of power shifts completely. With 10,000 loyal followers behind him and ultimate power finally in his hands, he re-enters the very city that had so severely persecuted his people. I mean, the entire Arabian Peninsula must have been holding its breath. Former enemies, like Abu Sufyan, guys who had violently fought the Prophet for years, were now entirely at his mercy. So you have to ask yourself, how on earth do you treat the people who tortured your friends and drove you from your home?
Well, instead of seeking revenge or blood, he stood right there before his former persecutors and granted total mass amnesty. He echoed the famous words of Prophet Joseph to his brothers, simply saying, "No blame upon you today." That single, mind-blowing act of absolute tolerance was so powerful that it caused fierce opponents to just drop their hostility and embrace his message in absolute droves.
Which brings us to Phase 4, the truth of his marital life.
Now, the historical pattern here is really striking. When you look at the data objectively, you see a man who spent the absolute prime of his youth, from age 25 all the way to 50, married to just one woman, Khadijah, who, remember, was 15 years his senior. After she passed away, he married Sada, an 81-year-old widow, specifically to provide her with protection after her husband died in exile. And yes, while he did marry Aisha at a young age, the vast majority of his subsequent marriages were to older widows, like Hafsa. The goal here wasn't what critics often claim. It was to provide safety, support, and to solidify absolutely critical community bonds during some seriously turbulent times.
All right, shifting gears to Phase 5, his great morals and humility.
To truly grasp just how intensely documented this man's life was, I want you to think about this highly specific number: 20. His companions paid such incredibly close attention to him that they officially documented he had a maximum of only 20 white hairs on his entire body, a few in his beard, a few in his chest, and the rest on his head. That level of hyper-observation means that all the historical accounts of his character, they're rooted in unbelievably close, minute-by-minute daily scrutiny.
And this intense documentation paints a really beautiful picture of his daily patience. Take Anas, his servant, who noted that in 10 full years of service, he was never scolded, not even once. The prophet would literally carry his young granddaughter, Umama, on his shoulders, right in the middle of leading public prayers, putting her down when he bowed and picking her back up when he stood. He even forgave an ignorant Bedouin who made the absolutely egregious mistake of urinating inside the mosque. He just calmly asked his companions to wash it away with water. He was famous for his constant smile, and he even paused a public sermon, sat down on a chair, and patiently taught a confused stranger all about his faith. Just incredible humility.
And finally, we arrive at Phase 6, his asceticism and passing. At the absolute height of his power, this man essentially ruled the entire Arabian Peninsula. Yet, while the mighty kings of Rome and Persia were sleeping on luxurious silked beds, the prophet chose to sleep on a rough-woven mat. The source texts tell us about a time when his close companion Umar walked into a small room and literally started weeping upon seeing the physical, red marks this harsh mat had left on the prophet's skin. But the prophet just smiled. He looked at Umar and gently reminded him that their ultimate reward was waiting in the hereafter, not in some fleeting worldly luxury.
Despite completely uniting Arabia under one banner, he deliberately chose to leave this world in a state of total, absolute poverty. He didn't stockpile wealth. He didn't build grand palaces. He didn't even secure vast riches for his descendants. He departed, leaving behind no dinar, no dirham, no sheep, and no houses. His entire legacy was purely ideological and deeply moral.
His closest, most trusted companion, Abu Bakr, perfectly summarized his passing with some incredibly poignant words. Standing by his side, he noted the absolute purity of the Prophet's life and his mission, saying, "How pure you are alive and how pure you are dead." It marked the end of a truly unmatched historical chapter, one where a leader actually completely fulfilled the massive trust placed upon his shoulders.
I really hope this explainer has given you a clear, structured insight into his remarkable biography using these historical sources. But I want to leave you with a profound question to chew on. If someone wielding absolute, unquestioned power deliberately chose a life of humility, total forgiveness, and intentional poverty, how exactly does his legacy challenge our modern obsession with wealth and status today? It's definitely something worth reflecting on.